Morning and welcome to Community Connections with Children's Services Council of St. Lucie County. I am just one of your remote hosts, Sean Boyle, and with me is
Ashley Mock, also
and
remote.
remoting. Welcome to the
Remoting.
half-hour radio program that airs every Sunday on our great partner, 104.5 The Flame at 10 a.m. But also, because quite honestly, we figured this out because we had to. We are also a Zoom show that airs, I believe, on Sundays on our Facebook page at the Children's Services Council of St. Lucie County, as well as resides on YouTube for all you youngsters out there. So, um, real quick, our radio slash Zoom slash YouTube show is all about connecting you, the listeners and or viewers, about what resources and things that are available for children and families in our great community we call St. Lucie County. Now, we at the Children's Services Council, I say this every time, are not radio show professionals, as if you couldn't figure that out by now. But what we do at the Children's Services Council is 5 things for our community. And those 5 things are: 1, make sure every baby's a healthy baby; 2, stop child abuse before it happens; 3, keep kids off the streets; 4, keep them in school; and 5, keep them off drugs, alcohol, and other risk behaviors, by offering programs and resources for all families in our community.
That's right. And those program areas that Sean just mentioned, we have information on our website, extensive information on our website about which programs are participating in each one of those priority areas and how you can get more information about them. So we share a lot of information on this radio show. We share a lot of information out in the public and on our Facebook page, but our website is really where all of that information lives. And if you need to find it, it's a really good resource to look at. We've also been sharing a lot of information there about coronavirus resources. So things that are important to you and your family. We have a page dedicated to that you can kind of find local and state and federal resources all there. And we're updating it all the time to make sure that we're capturing what is relevant to all of you.
And I think we've mentioned this on past shows, is that we are updating the program information as it becomes available. But please recognize and understand and be patient with us, because it changes almost every day. And the best source is, if you read something and you're like, I really want to participate in that, is to call the program directly.
Definitely. And that's, we're starting to get questions about summer programming and what that's going to look like and what all of our programs are planning to do. We've been having calls with our programs, I think weekly, it feels like, but a lot of them are mapping out their plans. A lot of them still have some question marks, but again, as Sean mentioned, we're sharing as much information as we can, but they really are the best source. So we have their contact information up on the website. So if there is a location or a program that you're specifically interested in, reaching out to them and getting that information firsthand is probably your best bet.
And if you, by all means, want to know really what's going on almost a day-to-day basis, make sure you follow us on Facebook. Look up Children's Services Council, St. Lucie County. There are other Children's Services Councils, and while they're pretty cool, the coolest one by far is the St. Lucie County one.
We like them. They're okay.
So we can't have a radio show without me mentioning this real quick. I'm going to keep it brief. Fill out your census information. Period.
There you go.
Point blank.
The
there
end.
You go. End.
I was out the other day. I don't venture out that often anymore, but I was out the other day, probably picking up food for my family. And I saw a sign out on the street, and it was like word for word what you normally say. And I was like, man, somebody's been listening to Sean and taking these talking points.
That's copyrighted material, folks, and somebody owes me some money. I'm just kidding. But that's great. That's great. But again, please, 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 please fill out your census information. So Ashley, I know this month is a special month, something that you can relate to very specifically and personally.
Yes, that's true. And we have good friends at Guardians for New Futures and Guardian Ad Litem and Communities Connected for Kids who have been sharing a lot of information about this month all month long. But it is Foster Care Awareness Month, and that is time dedicated this month to really highlight the work that foster parents do for us. I think we've mentioned it. I know some of our guests have mentioned it, but in light of coronavirus and the toll that it is taking on a lot of people, there are more kids coming into care now than probably have been in recent years, and the shortage of foster homes in our community cannot be understated. So if that is something that you are interested in, if you have ever considered getting more information about becoming a foster parent, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me directly. You can contact any of those organizations that we just mentioned. But now is a really great time to really highlight the work that our foster families do and the important role that they play, and draw attention to the real need that we have, not just in our community, but everywhere, for licensed foster homes for our kids.
And so, real quick, sorry, I had a little mini earthquake here. So, real quick, if somebody, do you know off the top of your head if somebody is interested, who they need to call
Yeah,
just to
so
get more information?
we're really lucky in our community that we have several agencies that actually license and support foster parents. The best place to get information about all of those options is from Communities Connected for Kids. And I'll actually make sure that we put a link onto our Facebook page for that as well. But Communities Connected for Kids really kind of details exactly the steps that are needed to take to become a foster parent, and give you the options for those different licensing agencies. And I always tell people, there's no right or wrong agency to pursue when you're looking at doing that. I feel like we interviewed all of them when we were setting out on our foster parent journey, but you have to do the one that feels right for you and your family. And we found that in this agency, but it may be different for someone else. So really get all the information there from Communities Connected for Kids. They are not going to sway you in any one way, shape, or form. But make sure that you do what's right and that you feel supported on that journey, because it's a lot of work and it's a big step to take, and really making sure that you have someone that's going to be by your side is super important.
And we've been doing these, this is a little in the weeds. We've been doing agency updates we've been doing updates for our programs every week. And we
Mhm.
have a segment that kind of just started as an appreciation because of everything that all the agencies are doing, because they've really had to adapt their business model. And it sounds simple, but when you're dealing with kids and families and you can't really see them face to face, you got to get really creative. So part of our agency updates has been kind of like, we call it the gratitude or the thank you section, right? So it started with me just, I think just listing in our email, and then it switched to video, and then we go live, and now we're bringing special guests on
So
to give
fancy.
thanks. It's not that fancy, folks, but it's fun. But I say all that to say that, we need to give thanks to every organization that you just mentioned, particularly Communities Connected for Kids, for Kids, the Guardian Ad Litem, because they do so much for a population that we talk a lot about on this show, but I think otherwise doesn't get spoken a lot about in regular, everyday conversation around the dinner table. So big credit to them for helping a very vulnerable population and continuing to promote it, or raise its awareness, I should say, not only this month, but all year round.
Yeah, definitely.
So I feel like there's other announcements, but we have a waiting room now. That's the one thing
Speaking
I
of
can say.
fancy.
Before COVID-19, we never had a waiting room.
No.
It's not a real waiting room, and I honestly don't even know fully how to
What it
do it.
looks like? You don't know what
But
it looks like.
but we're going to admit our guest right now,
It's
and
exciting.
and I always say it's a surprise, even though when we actually produce this, we tell
It's
everybody
not.
it's in the title, I think, but still act surprised because it's a surprise to us.
Okay.
Well, it's not a
I'll be
surprise to us,
surprised.
clearly.
It's kind of a surprise to me. You planned this one without me, so. Oh, there they are.
They're connecting right now, but we have our guests have joined us. We have let them out of the very fancy, I'm sure, Zoom waiting room for them to join us on our radio program.
They are here and live, and not really live, I guess. It's pretend live. But we have talked at length on the show, previous shows, about the important work that the team at Treasure Coast Hospice does in our community. We specifically work with them to provide the youth grief program, and there have been countless ways and shapes that program has taken over the years, but really all of it is to support kids in our community who have experienced a loss. And There are some really talented people that work in that program. We're very lucky to know them. But we've got two of them with us today. They're going to talk a little bit about that program, what they've had to change, like everyone has, and kind of some of the plans moving forward. I know one of the things that Sean loves to talk about all the time is Camp Good Grief, and that has kind of gotten thrown into the mix of this coronavirus mess. So we'll talk a little bit about what that's going to look like too. But we're really lucky to have them both with us today. So I don't know, did you guys draw straws? Who's going first? Or Lee, is it you? What's happening?
This is something that only exists on Zoom. I noticed that one of them had their mic muted. So I was like, no, we can't let them get away with that. So I unmuted everybody. So now they really have to decide.
She was trying to get ready, that's all. How about Orly? Why don't we start with you and you can introduce your guest. But just give us, for somebody who maybe isn't familiar with all the things that hospice does in our community, talk a little bit about how you guys work in the youth program and what you guys do for us.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name's Orly Marcourt. I'm one of the youth grief counselors with Treasure Coast Hospice. Our grief support program is not just for our hospice patients and their family, but we also provide support to anyone in our community that is experiencing a loss. We go into the schools and provide crisis support with them, as well as business for businesses. So we're really here to tend to the community. And especially right now in COVID-19, I think there's a lot of grief that's not just associated with loss. And so we've been addressing that as well in our program.
So I have a quick question for you. And I know we're going to let you introduce Damaris in a minute, but I have a question for you. And I think it's something that, prior to this COVID-19 environment, nobody really thought about what loss was going to look like for us. But for families who haven't been able to grieve through the normal process because, maybe they didn't get to have a funeral service, maybe they didn't get to see that person before something happened. I can imagine that is affecting children and families who are having to deal with that right now.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point, because when you think about all the rituals that surround when a loved one dies, that sense of community and coming together and feeling that physical support and comfort from members in our community, right now that's not happening. So it's really finding ways to reconnect with our people, our support. And Treasure Coast Hospice, our grief support teams have adjusted how we're providing that support too, through telehealth and recognizing that grief reactions may be amplified right now. So we have created on our website a list of resources that families can go to if they're struggling and need help. And we also created on our website consent forms so that they can, don't have to come into the office to sign a consent form. Like, it's right there, they can sign up, and then we can contact them and provide that support, whether it's education to the parents on how to support their children through this time, or providing grief support to the parents themselves, and also providing the grief support to the children.
So I don't know how, is it Zamaris? Did I pronounce that right?
You get an A.
You're the one that came in unmuted, and yet you haven't said anything yet. That doesn't seem fair.
Well, usually I just let Orly do all the talking, and I just kind of punch in with some punchlines. And
So Ashley brings up a good point, and I know Ashley and I have had conversations not off record, but offline about, we've known some families that have, either lost somebody because of COVID or lost somebody during this COVID time. And when they have funeral services, as Orly just talked about, it's, they have to limit the number, they have to limit, the time, and it's definitely not a normal. Grief is hard anyway, but when you have to change what's kind of community accepted, it gets even more complicated. But Orly said something that really caught me, is that, normally people associate grief with death and dying, but, of a person or a loved one. But there's grief that's happening right now, even though nobody has, quote unquote, passed away, because we have a whole new world that we have to navigate. It's almost like grief of our lost life, or our lost normal, if you will.
Absolutely.
So can you maybe talk about what some of that looks like?
Sure. I mean, I think what's happening is that we are so used to our like natural routine. Ashley looks like she's at a park, a really nice park right now.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
actually
her
quite
back
jealous
window.
of where
It's
she.
beautiful.
I'm actually very jealous of where she's at right now. But you know, there's a lot of losses that go along with just our daily lives and our routine. You know, for myself, just getting up, the ritual of getting up and going to work and having all the rituals that go along with going to work, and then of course the children losing a lot of those core connections and relationships by not maintaining that normalcy, as far as like going to school. So when you think about someone who is experiencing losses, not just death, it's like the core people that they look to turn to in those times are not available to them. So we're seeing a lot more of the complicated grief symptoms, like behavioral issues. You know, the structure is completely off. A lot of anger, a lot of outbursts, things like that, lack of sleep or lack of concentration. So not just in when we're talking about grief, but just loss of structure. I know like for everyone, it was very much a learning curve, just trying to manage like our routine as adults, and stay motivated. So how do we motivate the children to kind of continue to function and deal with some of these symptoms that they're feeling? So a lot of anxiety is coming up.
Yeah.
I know. That's something that Ashley and I have talked about offline
I
as
was
well.
gonna say that
Yeah.
list of things you just, I was like, I don't know if you were in my house this morning, but all of those things happened.
And I'm sure most of our listeners are like, but that's not just exclusive to children though, right?
No,
Because I think we're
that's
all
everyone.
experiencing that
Mhm.
to some degree. So knowing that, you know, we kind of, and you kind of talked to about like with telehealth and stuff. So two questions. One, like what are some of the cues that a family should look for if they're, you know, thinking, oh, my child might be going through this? And then if they were to call you, how do you deliver your service during this time?
Orly.
Well, you know, I think the first thing families have to do is like observe these behaviors in their children and connect with them. Like, what's going on? You normally don't have these emotional outbursts over something like this. So recognizing their lower tolerance in stressful situations. You might see them becoming more needy and clingy to you. For the teens, they might become totally, you know, withdrawn from the family and are also very demanding. Like a lot of times teens, when they get stressed out, they can't think beyond themselves. They're only trying to deal with their own needs. And so it becomes like all a big pile of stress for the entire family. And it's hard to react appropriately in those times. And it's just checking in with them and saying, hey, you know, I'm sad too, or I'm feeling angry over this whole situation too. What can we do together to help us through this? And just validating those feelings, acknowledging them, and labeling them. Children sometimes just need those feelings labeled because that gives them power to then work through them. And a lot of times with grief, the only way to work through grief is to experience it. So allowing them to be sad, allowing them to feel it is really important. I think a lot of times we want to just make it better and fix it up. But, you know, allowing them to be okay with feeling those feelings and then reminding them of past coping strategies that have helped. And then for us, you know, you can contact us still through our 403-4530 number. You'll reach Barbara, who's our administrative assistant, and she can explain our scope of services, provide some information, and then also schedule. And we also have, like I said before, we have our consent forms and educational resources on our website at www.treasurehealth.org.
And sort of how we're doing it, someone kind of calls in or signs a consent. They're assigned to a counselor. We are reaching out to them and kind of discussing how we're providing the service. So we've all become professional webinar people and watched every webinar ever created known to mankind. So of course it's been a learning curve. It's like on-the-job training, but learning how to keep children, especially for children, keeping them engaged on video sessions. So we're providing video sessions and phone sessions. So we're kind of tapping into a lot of our creative tools, and we're playing a whole lot more games, which is actually very exciting. But I think this gives us a really good opportunity to connect with children in a different way. I tend to find that children, or even adults, their guards are a lot less. They're not as high as they are because they're in the privacy of their own space. You know, you think about there's a little bit of anonymity when you're talking on the phone to somebody. I can tell you how I'm feeling, and I'm not too concerned about what your face is saying in response to what I'm saying. So it's definitely been interesting, but it's something that we're practicing a lot and getting a whole lot more comfortable with providing it to different communities.
That's really interesting, the point that you make about that. And I wonder if, you know, in light of this, all of these changes that have happened because of coronavirus, I wonder if that's one of those things that will stick around as an option for people, because it may be more comfortable for them to do it that way.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, because it kind of alleviates some of the barriers that might exist in coming into the office. So, you know, there's always growth through adversity. So we're growing.
We even see that, and we joke about it on the show, Ashley, where I think the messages that we get on Facebook through our messenger to the Children's Services Council about resources is probably what, 2 to 3 to 1 to the calls that we get.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Because it's easier to just type, because there's, like you said, a level of anonymity, and kudos for me for being able to say that word this morning, anonymity, to be able to do it that way. I'm curious though, first of all, Zamaris, now that you've become a webinar Zoom professional, any tips that you can provide to us, we are grateful for. But secondly, what games do you, I'm curious to what games you play on the phone or video. And it looks like on my screen, Zamaris's screen
it looks
up.
like she's, Orly, you have to answer that question by default.
So, well, you know, we've become very creative. Scavenger hunts are a wonderful game. Yeah, and you can connect a lot of feelings to finding objects around the house. We do bingo, we do art, lots of art going on. Kids, you know, coloring is therapeutic. And, you know, coloring a picture together, even though it's through this screen, is very helpful in processing feelings and thoughts. We do a lot of, we build forts, creating a safe space. Yeah, so, you know, we've really tied in a lot of fun clinical activities with our therapy.
I like how you threw that in there. Kate would be so proud of you.
Well done. We have history with those terms, fun clinical activities.
That's very good.
Real quick, Orly, can you, most of you, because I couldn't find my pen when you gave the number, what's the number again? I know it starts at 772-403.
4530.
And
there's
hey, she's back. Yay.
And then there's that learning curve of having to deal with this stuff.
Look, I just pitched that you were going to give us a tutor on how to make video work better, but I don't know if I'm up for your advice now.
Well, I think this has been like one of those barriers. It's you have to normalize it. It is part of the journey. It's part of the difficulty of trying to provide this type of service. You know, usually when you're in person, you don't say, hey, we just shut down for a minute.
So, I have to try that though.
Yeah, right. I'm shutting down. Wi-Fi is off. And for our radio listeners who probably have no idea what we're talking about, Zamaris disappeared from our Zoom call, but she's back. So real quick, I'm curious, because you're doing a lot of this through telehealth. Obviously the phone part I get, you just talk to them on the phone, but for video, and I'm thinking for the people who are thinking maybe I need to take advantage of this service, are they just doing it through their phone, through an app, or through the computer, or how's it working?
We're getting a little bit of both. Some people are a lot more comfortable with just using an app from their phone, iPads, laptops. So it just, everybody is different, whatever they have available. You know, it tends to work across all platforms.
And you're able to meet, and I say this because anybody that's listening and watching, if they want to call, they call the number 772-403-4530, because apparently I can't memorize those four numbers, 4530. But if they call, you're able to help them regardless of their technology expertise, if you will.
Mhm.
Because if they
We
can
try.
call, clearly they have a phone. So we have about 5 minutes left, and there's something that you said that I want to make sure that our listeners get. So when you were describing teenager behavior that might be associated with grief, I have young adults / teenagers in my house, and my first thought was, you just described every teenager. You know, a little bit withdrawn, maybe not participating as much. So my question to you is, for our viewers and listeners that have children and teenagers, how do you separate out what might be like normal behavior for versus what, because they might be dealing with the grief of COVID-19?
Well, I think you know your children the best, right? So if you're, check in with them, assess what they're going through by asking the questions, saying, hey, you know, I noticed that you're a little bit less connected to our family right now. Is there anything going on? And be willing to let them have that space where they're like, no, I'm okay. And they might not want to talk about it when you want to talk about it. So just being present and allow them to know that you're present and be there for them. And when they want to talk about it, be willing to have those maybe sometimes difficult conversations where you're just listening to them, and, you know, normalizing and validating their feelings. Because, you know, it's challenging. Like, one thing with grief, it goes in and out of different feelings and different moods. Like, it's not a nice linear curve. It's kind of a roller coaster ride. And, you know, so one day they might be coping very well, and then something might just knock them off a bit, and you'll see increased, you know, intensifies amplification of some of those behaviors. So that's when you check in.
I really like what you said there. One is, ask the question and make yourself available, and understand that they may not want to respond when you ask. So always maintain that openness and be available. That's a great parenting tip, no matter
For
the
sure.
circumstance at
Right.
all,
Well,
particularly for teenagers.
and on the other side of that too, they may come to you and want to talk about it at a time that's not convenient for you either. And making yourself available when they are ready to talk about it is super important.
Yeah.
Very good point.
We
So
tend to find most kids want to talk to us when we're in the middle of Zoom meetings. And,
Like right now.
right this very second.
Like 2 seconds before I jumped on. And
Yeah.
If you ask my wife, when my kids were little, she's like, they only want to talk to me when she got on the phone with somebody else. And they're
Yes.
like, Mom.
That's accurate.
We got like a minute left. So real quick, Ashley said that one of our favorite things is Camp Good Grief. And so what are the plans for Camp Good Grief? Because I can't imagine it's going to be like it has been in the past.
I was waiting for you to answer. We've rescheduled. So it was originally March 28th. So we have rescheduled for September 25th through September 27th at Light for Youth. We're planning right now, and we're hoping that we'll be able to meet at that weekend. Of course, we're always monitoring the guidelines set forth by CDC, and our priority is to keep everyone safe. So, but right now we're tentatively scheduled for September 25th through to the 27th. Yes.
That's good.
And camp
that's
is
funny.
open to anyone from the community as well. It's not just hospice patients. So for
Thank you.
children under the age of 18.
We started the show when you guys were in our waiting room, talking about the resources that were available, and we asked all of our listeners and viewers to be patient because it's an ever evolving world. And so I would ask, if you're interested in Camp Good Grief, to call 772-403-4530, but also to extend that same patience, because we don't know what tomorrow is going to be like, much less September. So we do appreciate, though, you rescheduling it and giving families that option. We have run out of time, but I want to emphasize to anybody that is watching and or listening, if you think your children, no matter their age, are experiencing grief, whether it's very direct in that they've lost a loved one, and or just the grief of not, for example, being able to attend high school graduation, I know that's something that's weighing in on a lot of kids. And if you see that their behavior is different and you're asking the questions, don't be afraid to call Orly or Zamaris at, again, 772-403-4530. And
They'll
thank you for
memorize that
coming
number
on.
now.
I know. I got the last three numbers or four numbers down. But
Just
thank you all for coming. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just want to say, just quickly, we did do a webinar called Grief, Graduation, and Gratitude. And it's on our website. So for parents who are looking ways to support their graduates at that time, there's a webinar there available for them.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll share that on our Facebook page.
Yeah,
Thank
if you're listening to it and you didn't quite grab all that, go to our Facebook page. We'll post it. I'm sure it's on
There
your
you go.
Facebook page as well, and your website. Give your website one more time.
www.treasurehealth.org in the grief support section.
All right. Thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you,
on. We greatly
ladies.
appreciate it. Hey, folks, it's a weekly radio program every Sunday at 10 a.m. on 104.5 The Flame. And during a pandemic, apparently it's a Zoom show as well. But it doesn't matter because it's always our children, our community, our future. More than ever, we're all in this together. We'll see you next time.